Let's see. So, yeah, it seems we are live. So, hello, fellow musical creatives, fellow musical inventors. How are you doing?
Not
Good.
bad.
Not bad. That's good. That's good. Definitely. Okay, so we're discussing today what's the composition process. What's the compositional process? So, let's get straight to it. And Megan, let's start with you.
Um, so I think my process, it's not always the same. And I try to kind of change it up because I think that the best way to get a variety of music is to change up the process. But there are a lot of types of things that I consistently, but I think in general, my process is very hands-on and interactive.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, I mean, the first thing I do is I usually like vast majority of my pieces are written for very specific performers, and like my music is very uh, physically engaging as well, and oftentimes I try to incorporate those performers' personality into the piece. So a lot of times I'll start the piece just by interacting with the performers. Sometimes in a variety of methods, depending on what if I can meet with them in person or if they're far away, we might send emails back and forth. Just about usually what kind of music they like, what do they like to do, maybe talking about some of my aesthetics. A lot of times, if I am able to watch a performer perform or I have that experience or just even have a conversation, oftentimes I'm very inspired by like their physical presence, like the mannerisms they like to use, the way they engage with their instruments. That sometimes comes into my thinking. So once I get there, then I always go to either creating some kind of sound and movement. It's depending on the piece. Sometimes the sound and movement is exactly what will end up in the piece or a starting point for that. And sometimes it's not. Like sometimes I just don't have the resources. I don't have the particular. I try to collect instruments to make sounds, but sometimes I don't. I don't have every instrument or anything like that. So like sometimes I might have a piece that I want right for cello, and I might try to play things on violin and be able to try to feel like what it kind of feels like, and then kind of be able to translate that. I think that sound to the instrument. I think um, instrumentation is something that's always come very intuitively to me, and I think of instruments often in a very physical way, like actually like the physics behind the sound producing. So I think that adapts its way to me being able to envision sounds that maybe I haven't even heard before because sometimes I'm creating new techniques. And I like to feel like what does it feel like to like move in these particular ways. Um, and then so once I get there, that's kind of like the starting point. Then I kind of am a little bit more fluctuating. A lot of times I do like to make restrictions for myself. A lot of times I make lists of like what the piece is not, and sometimes it's quite restrictive. Like my string quartet in
You mean the one from 2010?
yeah, the one from that one. I Part of it was like, okay, I want to work with a piece, and I'm gonna have all players play all the time, and I'm never gonna have any silence. Which was some silences at that time before leading up to that was something I really gravitated towards. So it was kind of like I'm gonna have no silence, and there was a very specific um, pattern. It basically went from um, a tiny part of the bow, gradually using the full bow, and then gradually it started at the frog and then kind of gradually going towards the tip and then gradually ending at just the tip of the bow. So there was like this kind of form there. Sometimes it's less, but I think for me, like, it's hard for me to think of what choices to make when the possibilities is the world, which is what it is when you start, so like sometimes it's helpful for me to like make a lot of restrictions and then try to find creative ways to like push back against those. And sometimes not. Like the piece I'm writing now, I'm writing the piece for keyboard. I don't think I necessarily had a lot of necessarily restrictions, but I kind of developed interest for it. So I was really interested in exploring dynamic, like the playing dynamic versus actually like the volume knob, mixing that. And then I was also interested in trying to find gestures on the keyboard that were a little bit like awkward and like clumsy, because I kind of wanted that sound. So I did like I don't have this keyboard that I'm writing, but I did like play a lot on my piano and try to find the right, there's a lot of one-handed things that are really awkward, and it's one-handed because the other hand's doing knobs. And sometimes like doing things in conflicting ways. Like if I have if I'm playing lower notes, but I'm slightly bending the pitch up, kind of playing with stuff like that. Yeah, so then when I start the piece, I think there's two, it's always different, but like when I actually start getting stuff on paper, there are two main ways that I work. Sometimes I have a lot of formal ideas and ideas about how I want the form and general shape of the piece to be. And that's kind of written out. And then other times once I have that, I write fairly linearly in that kind of form, usually, like where I don't always start at the beginning, but I start somewhere and then kind of right to the end, and then I'll sometimes there'll be little spots where I don't feel like I developed enough, and I'll come back and fill different holes, but it's a somewhat linear process. And other times, which is the way I'm writing now, is I start by writing, I start by just exploring a sound and kind of writing etudes or little fragments of music without any idea of what the form will be or what part of the piece I'm working on. And I just kind of write, sit down and I, write until usually I run out of time or energy. And the next day I almost never continue on from where I started. I always just start anew, but I'm kind of like, I'm really engaged in the world I set up. So it's not, the ideas are always somewhat related. And then I do go back and forth. Like I try to go back and forth a lot. Like if I can workshop the piece with the performers and get feedback, I love to do that and love to hear it in process. Even if I can't, like if I sometimes I go back to sound and come back. But usually when I haven't gotten to the form part of the piece I'm writing, but usually when I work this way, it's kind of like I just get a lot of etudes or excerpts, I guess, and then I begin to kind of physically piece them together. Some of them I kind of like the working that way too, because I feel like when you're not working in time, it's a lot easier to like throw stuff in the garbage because it hasn't actually it hasn't actually like been part of your piece. It just kind of, I don't know, it has at least for me. So some stuff I'll put in, and sometimes I'll expand. Sometimes I'll still have holes left. Sometimes I'll take things I wrote and put in the garbage. But some of the stuff in the garbage, like maybe I don't like the material, but like writing it kind of led me to writing something else that I might like. I sent over a couple of sketches for the piece I wrote now. I guess I sent 2 pages. So the first page was really just like kind of initial stuff with the performer. So I was kind of working out. I'm working with a specific synthesizer, and the synthesizer I don't actually own, which makes it a little bit more challenging. So I, was kind of researching the synthesizer and writing stuff both from the performer. I was talking to them. I was looking at manuals and videos on it as well. So like I kind of just wrote a bunch of information about the instrument, and then I had a bunch of like I think most of them I lost. Yeah, and then I had like a bunch of Post-it notes that I like had. A lot of them I lost, or they're over my office. Then I kind of like wrote places and was sticking them places while I was talking to the performer. And then like for me, I always will go on actual paper, and I have developed. For me, I have to write it at first in shorthand because a full notated score takes a long time, and when I try to do that, my brain works too fast, and then I forget everything I wanted to write, and I end up just kind of stuck. So I kind of have a very simplified ways where it depends on the piece, but it's always a mixture of like drawings and text, and then
A mixture of what? Sorry, mixture of what?
Pictures of, a lot of times the pictures are the shapes of the gestures. Sometimes notes. Okay. Sometimes, I mean, it depends on the piece. Like I have pieces where I've drawn little things of the instruments. I have pieces where I've drawn little stick figures and what they want to look like. But I think I do a lot of lines, a lot of like X's as like pitches. I do in some of my, like the piece I'm writing now, I do have a decent amount of pitch information on there, but it's written out pitches. It's not like in letter notation rather than in music notation. Because when I begin to write music, I write on like a sketchbook, like that. Just, and then this is an empty page. It has no staffs because I like to be a little bit. I don't like to be limited by something already printed on the scores, and sometimes I might have a piece that does require staffs, and other times I might not. But I like kind of being open ended. Yeah.
Can I show like the page you sent me?
Yeah, so yeah.
People might. Okay. Sent.
I think I sent you like and I sent you the PDF, which is kind of the same section of the piece that is like now written out into a material too, or as much as I have it so far.
Okay, so there you go.
Yes. So that's actually that's like the finalized version, of this piece. So this piece has it does have a lot of pitch information. It does have some steps, but most of the time it is one clef. There is a couple times when it goes into the grand staff, which is more typical for keyboard, because there's a lot of manipulation of various knobs. Yeah, so then there's control of whatever knob I'm using. So in this section, I'm using just the mod wheel and pitch bend knob, and the volume knob. And what's kind of interesting about, I guess, this piece that's really different for the way I work is that I have a piece for keyboard synthesizer, and one thing I haven't worked out is the patches. I actually have and the patches are what the sound's going to be. So I know a lot about gestures and rhythm and some pitch information. And so in some places, I have very, very vague ideas of what types of things I might be looking for, but I have very little idea about the actual sound because I actually haven't written or decided that component, which is kind of interesting. Because I'm a very timbral person. I love timbres. So it just kind of making me really kind of hyper focus on like gesture a lot more. For now, anyway. I mean, I'm sure I'll shift focus at some point working on the piece. Probably that will be a more collaborative part of the piece. When I get to work with the performer because I don't have access to that keyboard typically. So yeah,
And
that's also
yeah,
late stage.
there are some pieces where you can, well, we're not talking that much because the question part or what the question section is coming later, just so people know. Yeah,
Yeah.
everybody is exposing their own processes first, and then we question each other. But here it's not like with traditional instruments where you kind of have an idea. With patches in things, you really, even especially when you don't have the instrument to
Mm-hmm.
practice with, it, the timbres are gonna be resultant. Even the
Mm-hmm.
harmonies, you write them here, but yeah, with things they can some patches transpose the notes and all of that. So
I mean, and I guess I do have a little bit of experience. Like when I wrote Liaison, I was starting to write gestural material before the instrument design was finished. And as we changed, it took us a very long time to get to the point just to make sound. And the original sound that we made wasn't very interesting at all. It wasn't the sound we would use, but it was just exciting that we finally had something that made sound. And then we had to like edit it and develop more to find sound that was actually worth using. But I was already, I mean, I didn't write the whole piece, but I already had a bunch of some ideas for the piece before we kind of really knew what the instrument was going to do. Yeah, so I mean, I do have experience a little bit like that, but it kind of, I think I went to the sounds a lot faster. Like I had some things written and then
in liaison, you mean? Went to the
yeah,
sound factor.
I went
Okay.
to the sounds faster because like I think I was working on ideas as we were developing the instrument, but we were kind of constantly trying them on the instrument. So I was kind of getting more and more closer to the sounds. And then so much of the piece was like written on the instrument once we were done too. But it was the beginning, I guess, was kind of similar to the process for this. Yeah, and then also right now I have it all written like in an order, but the order of gestures in this piece is just arbitrary. It's not necessarily where they're going to be. It's not something I've really thought out. Though I do think sometimes when you arbitrarily put something next to each other in the same page, it kind of starts to influence you because you see them, together, and then sometimes I don't know, but I mean, likely
Yeah, it's
the
hard
form will
to
be
delete.
changed. Yeah, I mean, I remember even as an undergraduate, um, my I studied with J. Allen Yim, and he was for a while, and he was. I think he was right, especially at the time. I think he was like that. A lot of I was really like to fit like a whole phrase in like a physical line of music. So then like the paper size was strongly influencing my music, and not like in ways that I was making conscious decisions about. It was just kind of came into my intuition. And my music has a lot of intuition in it, but especially then it was very intuitive. And yeah, so he had me like try to like just cut random pieces of paper
Johan.
to like work on, so that
Mhm.
my size of my paper was always different. So then it was a less static thing. I remember at the time when I was in college, my younger sister was she was like 9 when I was in college, and I was home on break, and I think I just gave her a bunch of paper to like randomly cut, like, or not randomly, but a little kid working at stuff to make the paper size a certain way and then work with that. I think I don't think it makes as much of a difference anymore, only because I don't think I think a lot of times the sense of time isn't necessarily in the space. My music was I was working a lot with spatial notation, and I kind of do, but like not in my drafts. Like in my drafts, I'm looking at a spot here that it's probably like a half an inch. That it's like about a 20-second part of music, and then I have like the whole width of the paper that is 8 seconds. So I mean, I think I just kind of, yeah.
Okay,
I'm more aware,
yeah.
so I think I'm just a little bit more aware. So I don't let arbitrary things affect it quite as much. But yeah, I think for me, I'm always trying to make a different process or change it up a little bit. And so sometimes that means like, oh, I'm starting with form, or like leaving the form out here, or starting a different way, because I think the process kind of becomes the piece eventually. And if I don't change the process at all, then I'd be writing the same piece again and again, which there are composers who do that. And I mean, I think I've done it to a degree. Like, not that all the pieces are the same, but a lot of times I feel like I do have 2 or 3 pieces in the row that are really similar. Like I'm stuck in a creative rut, and then I have to kind of rethink my process, because I
That's
also
what.
get to a point too that I feel like, oh, for what I was setting out to accomplish with the piece, I feel like I have accomplished this. So now what do I do next?
Yeah, we all have kind of like tembral options, harmonies, durations, rhythms. In your case, gestures, pretty much that
Mhm.
one kind of defaults to. So
Mhm.
once one starts to recognize that, as an artist, it kind of become a comfort
Mhm.
zone, and one wants to get out of that. I
Well, and
would.
I
I would.
feel like for me, I'm very, very particular on the types of sounds I like. And I think like if I actually think about it, I think there's very limited amount of sounds that I really like just think, wow, I love this sound as itself. And I tend to really it always surprises people. I really dislike the sounds of like any kind of transient. So like the start or the end of the note. And I have a lot of really strong transients in my music. And I think it's because like for me, like if I'm gonna put it gets really boring just fading in and out of sound. And then if I'm gonna put them in, I just really want to put them in. Like I don't have a lot of kind of mezzos in my music. So if I of any sort,
You're
dynamics, I don't
a
have.
person of extremes, then,
Yeah.
right?
So if I'm going to do
Okay.
something a little bit, I'm just going to do it a lot. Yeah, and
Yeah.
I think a lot of it, and to me, like a lot of it is not necessarily just interesting sounds, but also like what do you do with the sound and what do you explore with the sound. For me, so sometimes I take sounds that, and sometimes I think interesting is better than like, I don't know, something I like that I would just want to like listen to in a room and I don't know, meditate or whatever. So yeah,
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'm gonna show what you sent me. Like this is how you
yeah.
think. This is how
So
you
that
think
was
about.
yeah, that was like a really early. So a lot of times I do have lists like really early
This would
on.
be a draft. Like
Yeah, so
right.
this is like just like this was me just exploring and learning about the instrument pretty much, and what I could do. Sometimes I have a lot of. Sometimes I'm like more kind of limited. Like if it's an instrument I know more. I think that's the difference too. Is that I really have no experience writing for synthesizers, and I don't have any experience playing on this particular synthesizer. So a lot of it was about discovering the instrument. But if I write a piece for like violin or horn or anything, any kind of conventional instrument, I already know, quite a bit about it. So sometimes the list is about kind of narrowing in like what kind of world in that instrument I want to
Yeah. What I see
explore.
here when I'm reading here is like the possibilities you have. Like
Yeah,
the
yeah,
materials in a way.
which is
I have this at my
interesting
disposal. I have this. I have this.
because I
I have
think a
this.
lot of other pieces with instruments I know better, I think it's the opposite. Is the I'm basically talking about the possibilities I'm not going to do and what I'm not going to do. And here is the opposite. I'm just showing kind of possibilities. Yeah. And I didn't think
Okay.
there was and then this page is like the early draft of what you saw, kind of eventually becomes notation. And it just kind of leads me to
Yeah.
be able to
Uh,
write stuff really
here's the
quickly.
note
So
wheel.
you could see like it's also it's very chaotic. Like most people, like none of my teachers ever wanted to look at this. So if you like I had
But
this is
this is for
like
one's.
these are
This
wheels.
is for oneself. This is for you. This is
Oh
your
yeah,
guide. This is your guide.
i
Let's
I
so to say.
can
This is the next
usually
step from
it's
the previous page. Like
yeah,
first page, what are the possibilities? This page will be like, what am I gonna do with those possibilities, right?
yeah,
Well, that's how I read it.
yeah. So I mean you can kind of see like I do a lot of mixture of graphic stuff like lines a lot and then text. um I
Well,
do sometimes I do a lot of text, sometimes a little bit, but um that's kind of I think when I was younger, when I was in my undergraduate, I did a
yeah,
lot more
the
purely
harmonies.
pictorial and a lot less text. And I think the older I get, the more text is getting into my drafts, probably because my mind doesn't remember things as much as it did when I was younger. But um,
That's what I
yeah,
noticed with your electric guitar piece. Definitely, a lot more text than I was used to in your previous
yeah,
scores. Well, when out of memory from
yeah.
all
I
that.
mean, I think
Yeah.
also like in the last, basically since graduating, like I try to make some of my pieces a little bit more
And here are durations also,
fun.
right?
Yeah.
20 seconds, 3
Uh-huh.
seconds, 9 seconds. Huh.
So I
No
have
volume.
duration sometimes.
Yeah, I can
And sometimes
see how
do
this
like
translated towards this.
yeah.
You can
So
huh, hear like infinite improvisation,
yeah.
very
Yeah, and
specific.
this piece has much, I mean, it's very guided improvisations, but it has a lot more improvisations than uh I do a lot of physical indeterminacy. I love that. That's something I'm really interested in.
The
That's for me like
material.
situations that are indeterminate by some kind of physical nature of like the human body or the
Mhm.
instrument, or the some kind of physical nature, and not it doesn't have anything to do with me making decisions or the reformer making decisions. Um,
It would be the
and
result in a way,
yeah,
right?
um, and I've
Here are the durations: 12
here I
seconds,
have
14
more.
seconds.
I mean, they're not like kind of I have more guided improvisations where the player does get to make some decisions following a bunch of criteria.
Mhm.
And a lot of it, that is a lot of the performer's personality coming through, because he happens to be an incredible improviser that I really respect. And so I kind of wanted to give him opportunities to do that, but in a way that I felt okay about. So I still have a hard time being like, okay, just do whatever. Even though it would probably be great, knowing this performer, but trying to still make it so it sounds like the piece. Um,
Okay, so that was a pretty thorough
yeah.
way of explaining your process. Uh, what I will say is that we should open now the space so that Shunting and I can ask you questions about
I
all of that
Sure,
information, and
sure.
kind of like focus today on all of that you said, instead of what we had planned, that where it was then gonna be Shunting talking about his process. Then we can do probably next week Shunting and stuff like that. So Shunting, hello,
Hello.
how are you?
I'm good.
Good to
Yeah.
know. Do you have any questions for Megan's processes?
Um.
How do
I.
you consider them different from, because before this piece I saw a piece for electric guitar from her, and
Mhm.
I could already see major differences from when we were students. Uh, what would you say about that?
I. I wanted to say that I am very impressed by her explanation because in the past, I mean, even now, when I try to think about composition or think about my own projects, I tend to work on the most typical conventional elements of music. I usually work on pitches, harmonies, rhythms, timbres. I maybe sometimes I try to think about the proportion, duration, but I don't think much about physicality or gestures.
Mhm.
And before I got to know Megan's music, I I didn't really think much about how physical gesture or or what she mentioned physical indeterminants, something like that. I
Indeterminacy, yeah.
yeah
Inter-
I just didn't think much about that, but but it is really relatable to me when, especially when I listen to her explanation a moment ago. I
Mhm.
Whenever we play music, it's impossible to avoid any consideration of physical gestures. How we play it, how we move our arms, fingers, how we blow it, all of these physical gestures. Um, in the past, to be honest, in the past, I, I was more skeptical about um, notating the physical gestures as a means to notate music, because I feel like it's like dance. It's like a choreographer. But when when I think deeper, and especially currently I work as a freelance piano instructor, a lot of time I have to take care of how the students sits, how students move their arms or fingers, and then yeah, actually, how we notate physical gestures can definitely be a legit way to notate our music.
that
And
that that kind of brings a question to my head that I use in my music, especially in my in pieces for guitar, because I know the instrument better than other instruments, and like I always imagine the player how he's gonna play the the music that I write, but I take it for granted because X or Y reason. Don't you do that with your piano music, Shanting?
my piano music,
Yeah, don't you imagine them like how they are gonna uh, sing, how they are gonna uh, do the physical gestures, how they are gonna move, what idiosyncrasies they are gonna take into consideration, like the visual aspect, you might say, of that when you write for
um,
piano specifically, and then other instruments, but piano is the one you know the most,
yeah,
right?
what I want to add when you talk about this is, if we know if we know an instrument well enough, perhaps we may think a lot about how it should be played. But somehow I feel like it's like a limitation, because when I myself play the piano, I tend to think about the most convenient way to play a passage. But perhaps the sound or the effect we want to make is is not that convenient. I don't know
Mm-hmm.
whether it makes sense to you, but for example, maybe you know the violin a little bit, and then probably you know how the violinist will play your piece, and then you try to think about the gesture, the physical gesture, and then you may find that what you write is less effective or less convenient, and then are you going to change it into a so-called more effective or efficient way? However, after you make the change, maybe the sound produced or the visual effects is totally different, and it is not what you truly want,
Mm-hmm.
right? I where Megan's music definitely has a lot of visual impact, and if we, for example, if something is very awkward, may but maybe the awkwardness is what is the point of the piece of music. S- and and somehow when we write this kind of contemporary music or new music, we we are creating something awkward to a certain extent, right? It is very different from what Beethoven will write. Even Beethoven wrote something maybe awkward to his contemporaries.
Well, he
Um,
had to change the last movement from his opus 131, I think, the string quartet where the grosse fugue came out from. Like the grosse fugue was originally a finale, the last movement of a string quartet, and well, they asked him to change it because it was so and so complex, so weird, so awkward for his time. And I think that even he recognized it, but it was special and awkward, and that it should be its own opus in the end. So yeah, but you're going somewhere with that. You're hitting something that has been a constant throughout composition or
but
throughout
but but
centuries.
anyway, the sketches shown today look very detailed. Look very detailed. Although we don't, I mean, for now we don't get to see the actual score. of, but the sketch looks very detailed. Because if I had a sketch, I would just put some dots and lines, and after years when I look back, I don't recognize what I'm trying to say on the sketch. So yeah, it's
when
pretty
it,
methodical already.
when it is my turn, I'll talk about that because I saw some sketches today that I have no idea what where they ended up in my music,
Mhm.
for example. But yeah, that
By
will
the way,
be later.
by the way, Megan, do you actually write some notes to remind
Yeah,
yourself
I
of anything like
I do. Notes like in pitches.
or explanation or whatever note
Oh,
or
for the
mind
piece, you
map.
mean?
Yeah.
I can
Yeah,
share some.
I haven't. I do. That's almost always the late stage, as well. Because I'm constantly re-editing the piece. But this is kind of, this is like a fully notated excerpt from the piece I'm working on, um, where essentially, so this is the first staff is what
Is
they're playing on the keys. So they on the instrument you can there's a
the other
button
ones?
to go to make it play an octave lower,
Um.
an
I
octave key, and so it actually can play an octave lower than the
um.
actual piano.
Perhaps I didn't ask very clearly. I would say like I'm talking about the sketches. Yeah. Yeah. Because
Um,
yeah.
Oh
Because
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
I will have the same question. Do you have any sketches where you kind of, because yeah, we have a few notes here. C sharp, B, A, or G. I don't know.
oh yeah, no.
You wrote over those.
Sometimes I would say that this is actually
Do,
probably a fairly pitchy sketch for me, and I think this whole piece is fairly pitchier. Oftentimes I don't even at things I do have information like for. Um, Sometimes I have pitches written like that. Sometimes I have like I have like I'm looking at just an excerpt I wrote for horn. And a sketch. This happens to be in the same book, and I have like a whole note, and all I have written is mid-range note. Um, and I imagine if I used it, I would actually probably specify a particular note, but it's not in this stage. There's other parts of this that I do have particular pitches, um, but but they're always written like as letters. They're never. I really can't think of a time when I've actually went and drawed like a 5-line staff in any of my music. And a lot of times it's orientation. Like I might have a gesture where I notate higher and lower pitches, but not specific pitches. Sometimes, usually just depending on what it's for, but usually in the early stages, it's like that. But yeah, my sketches are usually not super pitchy, and I think actually the pitch level of my music now in the sketches is probably pitchier than it was 10 years ago, 15 years ago for sure.
But by the way, simply out of curiosity, do you? I mean, when you start a piece,
Mhm.
do you, do you like just improvise it and then analyze it, or you just start? I mean,
No, I mean I work with sound. I like to make sounds, but I don't ever like actually improvise like sounds in time. Um, as a tool, I'm just kind of working with raw material, and then once I have enough of it kind of in my ear and in my body, I just write on actual paper, um, and work out the gestures and the times on the paper. The only time I've done improvisation kind of stuff that I can think of, and it wasn't me improvising. What liaison part of the method of how we worked was I would usually write some material, and she would work on it. We met like every couple of days for a large chunk of time, and she would learn it. She would work on it. We'd edit it to make it work well, and then she might go through other things we've already done, and then she would usually sometimes we'd ask each other questions and try out new things, but then she would usually just improvise for a sometimes a long time, and we'd record everything, and she would improvise on the instrument. Sometimes, a lot of times, given ideas that I had, or with our dialogue, or stubbing off what I gave to her, and then oftentimes I would take that improvisation and I would go through it, and there was a couple snippets, like gestures that were a very direct translation of an improvisation, but more of the times I would take things and I'd readjust their times and their orders, and kind of fluctuate between different things. But
We've
yeah,
been,
that
yeah.
that piece had a huge amount of improvisation as part of my process, but it was kind of like a collaboration, which resulted in Melanie's improvisation, and then and we kept kind of going back and forth. But yeah, a lot of the pieces I write, I guess I oftentimes it just depends on the piece. Like in this piece in particular, like because I don't have formal written yet, I have a few I just have a few gesture ideas of things I want to explore, and a few ideas with the knobs. And I have a couple of main physical gestures and then variations on the actual keyboard, and I just kind of go through every day and I just write material with them, and then and then eventually I'll come to a point where I have enough material where I then will go and construct them in a form. But other pieces the form has been really early on.
So
It just depends.
liaisons and this one shared that they are kind of written in pieces that you kind of like glue together in a way, right? And since we are referring so much to liaisons, I think that we should play it a bit. I have here the Mata Festival performance.
Yeah.
Do you remember this piece? Justin?
I didn't go there. Yeah.
No, you didn't
It
go
was
there.
premiered in
It
June
was,
in Buffalo.
yeah. Well, but just so you remember and other people can see what we're talking about, and
Yeah.
like Megan's music, this piece is very representative of Megan's music. So let's
Yeah.
hear and see it a bit. You guys can listen.
I don't hear any sound yet.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't hear any sound. Do you hear
No
any sound,
sound.
Shrinking?
Okay.
I don't hear any sound.
Give me a second. Give me a second. Stop sharing. Presentation. Share screen. Share screen. Entire screen. Oh yeah. Of course. Here we go. Now.
Yeah.
So this is very representative of Megan's music. What you saw notated uh, as a type of instructions in a way. When it is further developed, sometimes it ends up like this.
Mhm.
It gets more active now, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, there you go.
Ah, that's the one she broke a leg.
Very, very particular, very idiosyncratic, very unique, I would say. But then it was like these chunks. How was it? This is part of your process.
What did you say? I think this piece was probably actually written
How was
more.
Was it in chunks and then would you have
No, I think it was written. This piece was written fairly linear. I think where we kind of
okay.
I think there were we had ideas for different parts of the piece, and a lot and we kind of like saved things. But I think when we're actually constructing it, we the piece
I think you got cut there for a bit.
yeah, it's okay. Yeah, I co-wrote this with Melanie. Yeah, I think I processed, and I think a lot of it, the way she thought as a
I'll put
dancer
it
was
in the description.
very different
Yeah, yeah.
than my thinking as a composer. So yeah, I think I
So
definitely I that piece I think is very linear. I think my most actually PC piece is probably from Buffalo. I think is definitely Daring Doris, my cardboard piece.
yeah,
Um,
okay.
but I think the piece that you were referring to earlier, my electric guitar piece, is pretty PC too.
Okay. Okay. Chanting, any other questions? Do you remember this piece?
I remember
Now?
the cardboard piece more.
The cardboard piece? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Any chance
I
to
think
hear
that
it today too?
yes, I can search for that.
Yeah, Daring
They're
Doris.
indoors.
Yeah.
Now that we have sound finally, they're indoors. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So which one do you prefer? The
I
one
think
at
there's. I think they're all good. I think the
well,
first
okay.
recording is a studio recording.
Let's do
Good.
that one. Give me a second.
Yeah.
Uh, uh That's how it starts. Then goes further developing until.
Yeah. Let's see.
But here you had the instrument to practice with and kind of see where the sound was heading.
Yeah. Yeah, I had lots of cardboard all over my apartment when I was writing that. But it didn't always help, actually.
I can I like the contrast. One going very slow, the other being very active. That's kind of like
Mm-hmm.
more or less the middle of the piece, a little before that. But I
Mm-hmm.
wanna get to the part where they are tearing that apart.
Mm-hmm.
For me, for me, this is the most interesting. That's very metal, very heavy metal. And towards the end, it's all distracted, but
Yeah,
they are
it's really.
using pretty much the same gesture, all linked that
Gestures are always the
too.
same.
But what I wanted to say here, no, what I wanted to say here was what we were discussing with Chantin the other day is about repetition. How repeating a gesture over and over is never really repeating a
Mm-hmm.
gesture over and over because like it's
Yeah.
well, two things. The process is laid bare. Even though you say it's chunky, I really perceive this as very, very linear, in a way.
Huh.
And there, well, yeah, and because you see the process laid out before you. The process is the form.
Uh-huh.
The the form itself is unfolds before you as time passes, and
Mm-hmm.
the repetition aspect that Chanting mentioned these last few days is very present here because they are using more or less the same
Mm-hmm.
gestures over another with
Yeah.
different
That was
instruments.
really the first time I think I ever wrote a repeat sign in that piece. That was the first, because that was really my first piece that I was interested in physical indeterminacy and like pulses and repeats, which has become very important to my work. But that was, yeah, that was the first time.
Okay, Chantin, you wanted to say something about this piece now that you remember it?
Yeah, I remember that definitely. Actually, it's a very shocking piece to me, and I still like it because a lot of, I mean, very impactful, I- and and just and it reminded me of the old school teaching that music is to be listened, to be heard, but what if we also have something to see? I would say the piece give a very rich experience through our eyes and ears at the same time. Yeah, just if we go to find some videos on YouTube about like some very famous like instrumentalists, when they show their when their faces have various kind of expressions, people most usually they complain, but what if visual elements are actually essential to the part of our music making and our experience as audience? Why
Mhm.
we don't really have to object this notion of, I would say, a very rich
Mhm.
experience whenever we get to listen to Megan's music. That's what I would like to comment on your music. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks. I think I try to be as hard, really raw and authentic. And that can make people uncomfortable. And I really try to make situations where the performers are just themselves on stage, like as people and human beings, and not um, always trying to get everything, little tiny thing, perfect, um, and have that be the only success, because it's not very like humanistic. And so I do try to be really, I guess, raw, and I think I like to be, and I try to be, put my personality and the performer's personality in it. And so, like, and I think, yeah, I think that maybe is like plays a lot into it, because I think I don't necessarily try to take out things like the imperfections or the awkwardness. In fact, I actually try to embrace it and put it in my music, um, rather than trying to like steer clear, which I think, I know, like for me as a classically trained musician, you're kind of always
You are pushed
training
to,
to be
yes,
this perfection.
yeah, having
Yeah.
that execution being perfect every time, having the same execution every night, etc., etc. For me, what this piece represents is like stripping away all of that, stripping away, yeah, in a sense, like all of the, I don't want to say superficialities, but all of the covers, all of the scrapes, all of the capes of the instruments, and getting them to their rawest aspects, like their rawest gestures.
Mhm.
You see there what music, how we as human beings, like you said, like how do we make music, like through movement, in the end, through gestures,
Mhm.
through, if we strip away all the instruments, if we kind of rip apart a violin, but still do
Mhm.
the same movements and stuff, we
Mhm.
still will produce sound in a way. And even though it will sound more primitive, to our ears, to modern ears, this is what it kind of represents. It's kind of like it takes us to a place where music is in a way purer, in a way purer. Why? Because it is more primitive, because of its primitive nature. uh and I know I
Mhm.
don't say primitive in a negative way. I say primitive in the way you meant it, in the way that you used to say, that you said, that you are referring to in the, like, music, and it's more bare, it's naked music, one may say.
Mhm.
uh, I don't know if I'm making myself clear,
Yeah,
but
and I
yeah,
mean, I think it was cool with this piece. Bobby and Jason Crossfire Duo. They performed it a whole bunch of times, which was really, it was really cool to see the evolution, because in this piece, the instrument, every gesture that they do is written out. What happens to the instrument is just a result of that. So it's not always the same. Like sometimes the instrument gets totally destroyed, and sometimes it just gets banged up a little bit. Um, and it was cool. Like maybe the first time they performed it, that was something that they were kind of nervous about, because they hadn't, had, they're like, what if a new scenario comes up in performance that we've never had in rehearsal, that, and then things like that did happen. And then they realized that they could adapt. And then I think it became kind of freeing and exciting. I remember there was one performance that, I mean, the instrument really, really fell apart. Like it was all collapsed. It was all in tiny snibbles. And, they just had to run and each pick up a little tiny snibble and do their little gestures on whatever snibble they could find. And I mean, it worked out great. And they didn't, they still had the energy about it. They just kind of were able to go with it. And it was kind of cool to see. Like it started off being like something they were nervous about because it was something that they were unfamiliar with. But then it ended up being something kind of freeing because the performance could just be the performance.
Yes.
And as long as they put the energy and the intention behind it, it was going to be a good performance. Even if, something happened that wasn't exactly what they were expecting.
It transformed them from being these classical musicians, like perfectly trained, like these figures that people can't relate to taking them down to earth, like and the performance itself reflected that. Okay, some points that I wanted to say about all that you said at the beginning of the episode, like physicality and idiosyncrasies. The idiosyncrasies, like that is part of your process. That is always present there. Specific players and gestures. So for you, process isn't so much a thing that, well, there's always a dialogue between the internal, what you want to do, and the external, the situational, but you really take the contextual, the situational into consideration a lot, like the specific player, the physicality, the gestural, the you said that instrumentation comes to you naturally, but also being conscious of that is also another contextual thing. So uh, could you say that in a way your process is more directed towards the outside than more towards the inside? What you want to get out of the performer, like you want to see the performer being himself or herself or themselves, rather than just to get what your ideas out there in a way, or you want to find a
I
balance?
mean, I think it's a mixture of the two. I think it's like, yeah, I do want to expose the performer in a really raw sense, but I usually really push the performer too. Like usually especially performers who haven't played my music, usually it's very hard, because it's very hard to be yourself and expose yourself and be on stage and like see everyone see like rawness of like the physical movement of your body, especially for an instrumentalist, like who might be used to like hiding behind their instruments. And to have that come forth, it's definitely a challenge for most performers, and I think it can be freeing, but I think it takes a while for a journey for the performer to get to the point where it is freeing. And yeah, so but I do think there's the interaction. I think I just really am interested in people. I really love to people watch everywhere I go. I mean, just like I watch people around me. I love that. I love like sometimes even just like the way a person, like a performer, talks, or the types of physicalities they like have with their bodies when they're like, if they're like jittery or like stiff, or yeah, all the mannerisms. That's like sometimes like really plays into it. I just think it's really, I don't know, it's really interesting to me, because like people are dynamic, and at the end of the day, like instruments they're not dynamic. They're object. I mean, they're just materials coming together. And so, yeah, I think I kind of almost maybe think of it as like a circular process. Like, I, there's a lot of what I'm interested in. There's a lot of internal, but it's like I'm interested in the external and I'm interested in the other people. And we're kind of all, um, I'm kind of influencing them and then they're influencing me and then kind of continuously. But yeah, I mean, I think I always tell people, like, some people are like, oh, what's your favorite instrument? I think at this point, like, I just really don't care what instrument I write for. So much. I care about the person I write it for. If I'm
Hmm.
really interested in that
Yeah.
person as like a musician, I just
Mhm.
accept whatever instrument they play or whatever instrument they're willing to play. And I just accept it and embrace it in the piece.
So you want that
I can never
person?
really imagine.
So do you want that
Yeah, I say
personality
it's
to
hard
come
for me
out?
just to be like,
Well,
write a piece for a flute. Yeah,
okay.
I think I want the personality to come out, and I want to, I don't know, kind of maybe like push them a little bit out of their comfort zone, and then they kind of can push me a little bit too. Um, and I mean, I think also, especially at this point in my life, I'm very comfortable at being uncomfortable. um, and very
But
raw and honest, probably.
that's how you mature as a person, as a human being, right? Like
Yeah.
being yourself.
Um,
Being yourself is being uncomfortable. Like you are more
yeah.
comfortable when you are like in the group think, when you are acting like other people, when you are acting like yourself. It's really uncomfortable. You are putting yourself out there, you are taking a risk, so you are pushing them to be themselves in a way. And that's
Mhm.
very, yeah, that's very noble. But that's kind of like, I wouldn't have guessed that this conversation about processes would have led us here towards personalities, towards
Mhm.
uh, kind of showing off personalities, developing personalities, showing the world who you are as a process. Like that's part of the formal
Mhm.
process of the musical process, and that's a very interesting idea that I will keep from this conversation. Another thing I wanted to highlight was the two ways that you said you worked as, like the formal ideas written
Mhm.
out that resulted in linear forms
Mhm.
versus
Mhm.
the start exploring sound without the ideas of the form or part of the piece, right until exhaustion.
Mhm.
Like they were etudes. We were talking about moment piece
Mhm.
forms from Stockhausen, like a few
Mhm.
days ago, uh, and to physically piece them together in a kind of a temporal way. uh, well, in a way, because it's easier to throw away what doesn't work. But I feel like you get more excited by the second way of working, the second process.
There
Like,
was a newer way of working, I would say.
yes.
I I didn't. I never did it until maybe like halfway through graduate school, and I think that way of working allows me more scope of different kinds of forms at the end because I think oftentimes when I work the other way, either the form is really intuitional and I think I have very particular ways. My intuition works in a particular way. And it's not very, it doesn't have a lot of variety, which I think is the true of most people. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, I think some. I also think like I was very interested in there being like a very like mathematical physical purpose to like every duration and every note. Um, and then I wrote my string quartet in Buffalo, and that piece really did that. Um, everything was a specific note. It was really a really specific thing. It was really a super focused piece. Form came really early on because it already had a directionality, and I think it was successful. But I think it was kind of successful in a way where there wasn't really a lot more to explore there. I think I did what I set out to do, and then the only thing I could do would repeat it. I kind of felt like I had gotten that, and
you exhausted that
yeah,
process,
I
that way
exhausted
of
it.
thinking. Yeah, and I totally get it because most of us composers kind of do that. That's what sketches are for in a way. Preconceived forms like um you may have the argument that sonata forms go. There are many ways in which the composers throughout the past have explored it, and so on and so on. And theories will say that it is an infinite way of thinking about music. But yeah, in a way, it also kind of got exhausted. Like the same with symphonies, the same with
Hmm.
all of these old forms that we associate with classical music. But this other, like, it can only go on for so long for someone that wants to find something new, some new ways of expression, as I have said before. And
Hmm.
it basically leads me to my last point here, that I think we should be closing. Like what you
Yeah.
said, that the process becomes the piece. That, and I think that that's very very true. Like if you want to change
Hmm.
the way you write, if you want to change how you project your pieces, you must fundamentally change the way you begin, the way you go from
Hmm.
point A to B to C to the conclusion, and to all of that. I think that that is very very fundamental, and that's something that uh, whenever at least I in my pieces uh, can see a significant change, a significant leap from being stuck, you might say, as an artist, being stuck as a composer, is whenever I change the process,
Hmm.
whenever I change something
Hmm.
fundamental from that I kind of default to, maybe rhythms, maybe pitches, harmonies, gestures, even when you're thinking about gesture in a more gestural manner, or forms. Like, yeah, you sometimes, for example, whenever I talk about my process, I will say that at one point I will say, I will think that everything should have every material should be on the first page, and if every material wasn't on the first page, that will get further developed, then I wouldn't it wouldn't be a good composition, for example. And that's the economy of materials, type
Hmm.
of philosophy, aesthetic, etc., etc. So
Yeah.
uh,
I mean, I think the other thing is that the with that second way too, it kind of makes writer's block kind of not. It's not a thing for me when I write that way because can just write and it doesn't have to be. A lot of times, writer's block I think is like kind of really instilling fear, like, oh, it has to be good or it has to be perfect. But in that type of writing, that process, it doesn't have to be good or be perfect. I mean, because it might not end up in the piece, and it's not difficult to remove it from the piece because it's not really in the piece yet. Um, so that I like that nature about it, that I could just write. And sometimes I do have to write a really bad idea to get to something more interesting.
well, yeah, I could expand on that, on the experience of time, like how well this would be the qualitative time against chronometric time and stuff like that, and how you take chunks out, and
Hmm.
stuff like that, and related to process. But I think that this is a good place to leave the conversation, at least from my part. Shunting,
Yeah.
do you want to add something to all of this? Hello, are you even there?
Oh yes, I'm here. I accidentally muted my mic.
It happens. Don't worry. Do you want to add something like how the process becomes the piece in a way, or the process is the piece? Like I think that that's the main idea of all of this. That's what ties all that we have talked about today together.
I I think the most I mean the thing that I reflect a lot is the personality part of our conversation because recently I didn't compose much, but actually I have a piece to work on, and I'm not composing partially because I worry about whether the piece is good, and I'm not writing any single note lately,
Hmm.
and somehow today's episode gives me a little bit of courage to to work on my stuff. I think it's like our life. We need to embrace a lot of awkwardness, weaknesses, and we can be perfect for everything. And somehow
Hmm.
the the imperfection is good.
Yeah, I think that imperfection shows who you are. Like when you try to always put yourself at this perfect being is not really genuine, or genuine
Hmm.
or authentic or anything like that, and that becomes another conversation. So I don't wanna uh,
But
talk more.
yeah, and ultimately, we could choose to write for computers. Um,
Sure, and
and there
that
are
will
many there are composers who only choose that. But like I have written for computers in the past. I haven't in a very 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 long time, and I don't foresee me going doing that. I don't really foresee me doing that ever, to be honest. Because I like people. I just interested in people.
well, and part of those people. Yeah, what I learned, one
Their
thing that
imperfection, yeah.
well, of course, yeah, yeah. But one of the things that I'm gonna take away from this conversation is that personalities, people, are part of the process. We tend to think too much in the abstract and leave the individual behind. And no, we're writing for human beings. We're writing not for the musician. We're writing for human beings. We're writing for other, and that connection between composer and performer is between a human being and another human being, an individual, an imperfect person
Mhm.
and another imperfect person. And the process is in a place between those, that communication between those two imperfect beings. That's what I'm gonna take away from this.
Mhm.
Anyway, uh, anything else that anyone wants to add? No, I think that is a good place to leave this
I'm good.
conversation. Next week we're gonna be discussing Sean Ting's process and how he thinks about music. So, to the
Okay.
lovely people watching and to the lovely musical makers, inventors that I'm talking to, I think I will say goodbye. Have a good evening.
Have a good evening.
Bye.